Michael, I'm sorry, but it's clear your other interests just aren't compatible with this company anymore. I sat still, hands folded, watching Jonathan Cray, the new CEO, deliver his lines like they were rehearsed. He didn't blink, no hesitation, just corporate polish and a printed document, as if this was the end of a quarterly review, not the end of my 8-year career at Industrologic. The HR director beside him, Angela, said nothing. She didn't look at me. She just waited, poised with her tablet, probably already filling in the departure form before I'd spoken a word. I didn't flinch. I didn't sigh. I smiled, because Jonathan had no idea what he was walking into. My name is Michael Ross. I'm 39 years old. I was the CTO of Industrologic, a Houston-based company specializing in industrial automation software and smart control systems for advanced manufacturing plants. I'd been with the company since day zero, before it had a name, a logo, or a bank account. I wasn't just an early employee. I was the guy who stayed up all night debugging our first client demo while the power cut out during a storm. I was the one who rewrote our back-end twice from scratch when we pivoted after year one. I was the one who made us viable. And I was the one they were now trying to erase. Jonathan was brought in a year and a half ago by the board, after our last CEO stepped down citing founder fatigue. I didn't like him from the beginning. Not because he was external, not because he was young, but because he smiled too much and listened too little. His first 3 months were filled with jargon, structural clarity, platform-based reorganization, vision tier initiatives. No one in engineering could figure out what he wanted. Hell, I don't think he could figure it out himself. But I gave him a chance. I stayed out of his way, let him run his endless strategy deep dives and consultant slide decks. I figured he'd burn out or move on like the last one. Then he started firing people. It began with Dean, our mechanical systems lead, a lifer. 15 years in industrial engineering, gone after one review. Redundancy. Next came Priya, who built half our field diagnostics protocols. Restructuring. I wasn't blind. I knew what was coming. And more importantly, I was ready. Because 2 years ago, before Jonathan even showed up in our office with his gelled hair and Harvard grin, I had already started protecting myself. I met Melissa Crane, an old friend and former founder herself, for lunch at a quiet cafe in East Downtown. Melissa had just exited a successful logistics startup and was looking for quiet, long-term investments. I pitched her something unusual. Buy 30% of my company, I said, quietly, through you. She raised an eyebrow. Not directly? Number, I don't want the board to see it. I want voting leverage, strategic weight, but not attention. You want shadow equity. Exactly. We set up 2 entities, one in Delaware, one in Wyoming. She made the purchases over 6 months. Everything was clean, legal, invisible. On paper, she was just a passive investor. In reality, she was my anchor. By the time the dust settled, I controlled 30% of Industrologic. The board didn't know. Jonathan certainly didn't. He saw me as a relic, a guy with calloused hands and too many GitHub commits, someone to phase out. And now, he thought he'd succeeded. I picked up the termination letter and skimmed it. Termination for cause, it said. Failure to disclose external business affiliations that pose a potential conflict of interest. It didn't name specifics, because there weren't any. Jonathan was fishing. Someone had probably seen my name attached to a side project repo on GitHub or heard a rumor. That was enough for him. You're taking this rather well, he said, leaning back in his chair with a practiced air of detachment. I've been preparing for this meeting for a year, I said. And so have you. He blinked. Excuse me? Never mind, I said, standing. You'll understand soon enough. I left my badge and laptop on the table. I didn't pack my office. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out, stepped into my car, and drove straight to Melissa's house. She opened the door before I could knock. I saw the calendar alert, she said. They did it? They did. And the plan? We begin. That night we met with her legal counsel. Not mine, hers, someone she trusted. We drew up a packet of documents detailing the ownership structure, voting rights, and restrictions on major transactions without shareholder consent. Melissa had 30% voting control. With that, we could challenge any board decision, block M&A attempts, or trigger a formal review of leadership conduct. We sent the first letter the next morning. Not a threat, not aggressive, just a formal inquiry. Why was a founding executive dismissed without consultation with major equity holders? By Wednesday, the board was scrambling. One director replied, asking for a call. Another asked if Melissa could clarify her position. She declined both, citing legal review. Meanwhile, I was quiet. I didn't tweet. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I just watched. That Friday, a small write-up appeared on a business tech blog. Inside Industrial Logic, tensions rise as quiet investors push back on leadership decisions. Anonymous sources, speculative, but enough to spark interest. And that's all we needed. Jonathan called me that night. I didn't answer. Saturday morning, Melissa got a message from the CFO, politely requesting as it down to evaluate governance alignment. We said we'd consider it. By Monday, the board called an emergency session. Not all of them were looped in when Jonathan pushed the termination. Now they wanted answers. Melissa gave them some, carefully, legally. She reminded them of their fiduciary duties, the weight of their decisions, and the optics of removing a founder without cause. Tuesday afternoon, Jonathan emailed me personally. Michael, I believe we've had a miscommunication. I'd like to talk, face to face if possible. I forwarded the email to Melissa. She smiled. He's breaking. Not enough, I said. We didn't want his apology. We wanted leverage. We wanted structural change. That night, I drafted a revised governance amendment, one that required approval from all shareholders holding over 25% before any C-suite termination or licensing restructure. Melissa filed it Wednesday. It didn't pass immediately, but it sent the message. On Thursday, Jonathan was suddenly on PTO. Friday morning, I got a call from one of the original board members, Miriam. She'd been with us since Series A. Michael, she said, off the record, was this personal? No, I said. It was structural. The next week was quiet on the surface. No statements, no public changes, just an eerie silence in the office. I wasn't there, of course, but I knew how silence sounded in that building, and I knew what came next. Melissa and I weren't just playing defense anymore. We started a formal audit request. Under Texas corporate law, any shareholder with over 25% can demand a review of financial decisions and corporate correspondence. It wasn't about catching fraud. It was about showing the board we had teeth. And they noticed. One of Jonathan's closest allies on the board, a guy named Brent who ran product oversight, suddenly scheduled a meeting with Melissa's attorney. Not with me. Not with her. With her lawyer. That told me all I needed to know. Jonathan was losing them. The cracks widened faster than I expected. Apparently, Melissa's quiet buy-in had been a sore spot already. Several board members felt burned that they hadn't been looped in, especially once they realized how much strategic weight she held. And now the guy who'd pushed out a founding executive without asking anyone? Yeah, they were starting to panic. But I didn't want panic. I wanted positioning. So we made a move. Melissa offered a formal resolution, creation of a founding stakeholder advisory council. No real power, just review and influence. But the language was clever. Must be consulted on all material leadership changes, strategic partnerships, and asset sales involving intellectual property developed before Series B, which was almost everything. The board resisted at first. Jonathan opposed it outright. But 3 days later, one of the board members abstained instead of voting no. Then another. It passed with a narrow margin. That same afternoon, I got a call. Not from Jonathan, from HR. Michael, would you be open to returning to the company in a non-executive advisory role? They asked. Something that preserves continuity and reassures stakeholders. I said I'd think about it, because by now it wasn't about returning. It was about reshaping the company I helped build into something that couldn't be hijacked again. I walked back into that office 2 weeks later, not as an employee, as a stakeholder. The hallway was different. People looked at me sideways, some with relief, some with fear. They didn't know if I'd been reinstated or come back to burn the place down. I met with the board. No lawyers, no drama. I told them the same thing I'd told Miriam. This isn't revenge. It's architecture. You don't fire the guy who built the foundation just because you don't like how he decorates the walls. We agreed to terms. I'd join the advisory council. Jonathan would remain CEO, but with reduced authority over technical operations. All changes would now be vetted through the council before being implemented. Licensing? Same. Tech partnerships? Same. He didn't like it. I could see it in his clenched jaw during the final session, but he agreed. Why? Because he had no choice. 2 weeks later, I received a formal apology from the board, not public, but written. It acknowledged errors in oversight and expressed a desire to rebuild trust with founding stakeholders. I framed it, hung it in my home office. Then I got back to work, not on company projects, on policy. I helped write the new framework for founder protection. I joined 2 other boards as a consultant for early-stage teams to ensure they'd never face the same screw-over I did. And I started mentoring technical founders again, quietly, with purpose. I didn't want a podcast. I didn't want a book deal. I wanted resilience. One day, Jonathan passed me in the parking garage. We made eye contact. He gave a quick nod. I nodded back. Nothing more. No need. On Monday morning, I booked a private conference suite under Gabriel's name. Inside, a high-res scanner, a secure laptop, and a folder full of evidence that wasn't supposed to exist. This isn't just gray zone legality, I told him. It's breach of fiduciary duty, deliberate misrepresentation to shareholders. Gabriel didn't blink. And you've got a timeline? 6 weeks, tops. They'll execute the licensing transfer before the end of Q3 if we don't stall it. Then we stall it, he said, sliding the documents back into the envelope. And we do it loud. By Wednesday, we had 2 letters drafted, one for the board of directors, formal, calm, outlining concerns about a material transaction not reviewed by all equity stakeholders. The second one went directly to our compliance auditor, not accusatory, just informative. The effect was immediate. On Friday, CoreLink's stock dipped 3.4% on speculative headlines. Nothing major, just enough to send a ripple through the investor chats. And then it started to unravel. Carla Nguyen, our legal officer, called me personally, said she'd seen my name come up in an internal review and wanted to reconnect. Carla, I said, before we say anything else, did you authorize the Ares term sheet? There was a pause. What term sheet? Exactly. That same night, I met with 2 former board members, people who knew the original mission of the company. One of them, Jim Navarro, was livid. They're gutting it, he said, selling the core so they can inflate short-term metrics and cash out. And they think no one's watching, I added. Jim nodded. Until now. That weekend, Gabriel pushed a subtle but powerful signal into the market. Halcyon Capital was calling an emergency stakeholder review. It was worded generically, just a footnote on a quarterly report, but it made headlines. Private equity firm challenges CoreLink's IP sale terms, potential board shakeup looming. Now the board had to play defense. And Mark Leland, the man who fired me, finally picked up the phone. Michael, he said, voice tight, I think there's been some confusion about recent decisions. No confusion on my end, Mark. You pushed a term sheet without board review and signed it with access you weren't authorized to use. There was no malice. You fired me for conflicting interests while hiding a $22 million licensing agreement with a known competitor. Silence. We can fix this, he finally said. You mean, undo what you did? Let's talk in person. I didn't agree. Not yet. Instead, I leaked. Not to the press. Not directly. To our lead engineer, the one who'd spent 6 years developing the drone autonomy core, and to 2 key team leads who were already uneasy about Leland's management. I didn't need to expose everything, just the part that mattered. Their work was about to become someone else's product. Within 48 hours, a staff memo landed on Gabriel's desk. 5 resignations. Senior, public, timed. And the board could feel the cracks forming. That's when Gabriel made his move. Through Halcyon, he issued a formal objection to the pending IP transaction, triggered a clause buried in the original shareholder agreement. A full vote was required for any transfer involving core proprietary systems. And that vote? It could not happen without me. Mark tried to stall, tried to rally votes, offer transitional bonuses to board members. But Carla flipped, so did Navarro. And the deciding vote came from Eleni Brooks, the founder's daughter and original investor. You tried to cut corners, she told Mark during the emergency session. Now it's cutting you. The board convened privately 2 days later and voted 6-2 to terminate Mark Leland's contract immediately. My office was quiet, unnervingly so. The echo of my own breath felt louder than usual as I sat alone, watching the boardroom feed on a muted screen. I wasn't supposed to be here anymore. Technically, I had been let go 4 days ago, but ownership doesn't disappear because someone tears your name off a door. My lawyer, Philip, had been working in silence from a separate room, coordinating with the trustees holding my shares. The stack of documents in front of him was ready, agreements, timestamps, and communications that linked every inch of my stake in the company to verifiable funding trails. Quiet money, clean paper. Across the building, the board had just gone into closed session. A vote was about to be called. It started moving faster than I expected. Just hours after my dismissal, 2 junior engineers left abruptly. A senior designer followed the next day. No explanations, no notice. Just gone. People knew something wasn't right. And I knew what came next. That same evening, before the sun even set, I contacted Philip. We didn't wait for emotions to cool. We went straight to the top. The packet we sent wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A short message to the board. There are irregularities concerning the legality of recent executive decisions, and an undisclosed stakeholder may have been compromised. The attachments did the rest. Internal chatter erupted within 24 hours. One board member replied directly, then another, then 5. By the end of the second day, the board's legal counsel requested a call. They wanted clarification. I gave them what they needed, and nothing more. I wasn't after revenge. I wasn't trying to burn the place down. I wanted stability. I wanted security. I wanted what I helped build to stop being treated like someone's playground. The problem with people like Carl is that they think speed equals intelligence. He thought firing me quickly would kill the threat. He never considered that a clean break might bleed. On day 3, the real blow landed. Philip coordinated with a shareholder proxy firm. We executed a motion to block Carl's pending licensing deal, the very one he'd fast-tracked through without full disclosure. It was dead in the water within hours. One of our patent lawyers had been sitting on an NDA-bound memo that contradicted Carl's narrative. All it needed was someone with standing to demand review. And I had standing. By the time Carl realized what was happening, the board had called a special meeting. Not with him, but about him. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Philip sat in. He watched the panic unravel from across the table. He told me later. Carl tried to shift the blame, claimed there were communication failures, misunderstandings. He tried to frame it as a necessary realignment for innovation. But it didn't land. Not after my documents. Not after the signatures. Not after the vote to suspend his authority passed, 7-1. 2 days later, they offered me a seat on the board. I didn't say yes immediately. Part of me didn't want it. Part of me wanted to disappear, take the win, and walk away. But when I walked back through the doors of the company, not as an employee, not as a subordinate, I saw faces, the ones who stayed, the ones who still believed, and I knew I couldn't walk. The new CEO started last week. She's smart, careful, doesn't throw around phrases like conflicting interests when she means, I don't like that you know more than me. We don't talk much, and that's fine. I sit on the board now. I don't run the machines. I don't manage the product cycles. I don't debug code at 3 a.m. But when I speak, people listen, and that's enough.